This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. How can our most basic human behaviors work against us, and what can we do to use them in our favor? They're called the artisans of crime, and con artists use what they know about human behavior to identify, lure, and take advantage of a victim. How and why does it work? New Yorker contributing writer Maria Konnikova explains in The Confidence Game why we fall for it every time. But understanding all these little bits of psychology is not only helpful in avoiding becoming a victim, we can also learn to be better members of society. In the case of our next author, we can learn to be better co-workers. Esquire senior editor Ross McCammon talks about that in Works Well with Others, an outsider's guide to shaking hands, shutting up, handling jerks, and other crucial skills in business that no one ever teaches you. But first, I'm a prince from a faraway land, collecting money to interview Maria Konnikova. So the other day, there was a guy who was offering to sell me a portion of Central Park. And I think I got a really good deal. It was like $5,000 for several acres.
That's really good, because when I bought the Eiffel Tower, I think that it was a little bit worse of a deal. So you're a better businessman than I.
The way I see it, I was conning him.
I couldn't agree more.
So
I think I was probably taken for a ride. I think I could have gotten a better deal on the tower.
So how did you get soaked on the Eiffel Tower? How is it possible? How could someone come up to someone with a PhD and sell them a piece of the Eiffel Tower?
That's a fascinating question, and actually Victor Lustig, Count Lustig, sold the Eiffel Tower to very savvy investors twice. Not once, but twice. And the way he did it was he said that, this landmark is going to be destroyed for scrap metal. And this worked because it was in wartime. France was going through a lot of economic problems, and so this wasn't so far-fetched that you would actually need scrap metal to help the war effort. And so two separate groups of investors thought this was absolutely plausible. And they were, as I said, incredibly savvy, incredibly intelligent, people who were very successful in life, which is how these things usually work, because suckers aren't suckers. They are just people like you and me, or smarter than me, maybe, and they just fall for a good story because con artists are consummate storytellers, and they know how to sell you what you want and how to sell it in a way that you don't even see them coming. I mean, the people who bought the tower didn't realize they were being conned, and they didn't report it. That's how he was able to do it twice.
Right, and so there's this idea that we are all being conned in some way or another at almost all times.
Absolutely.
Right? Because we have to accept some smaller version of a story for pretty much everything that we do. You know, whether and there's signaling in everything we might choose. I'm on the board of my kid's school, and I was having some conversations. I said, you realize we put more time probably into choosing a school, my wife and I, than almost anybody we know. But max 10 hours into a place that we committed to for 10 years.
Yeah. And
fundamentally we're being sold on a story there that is different from the reality. And we're all doing it at all times. And the question is just how much, in this case, I don't think we were taken for anything bad. But the lot more there is something very wholesome and okay.
Yeah.
But we could get sold all kinds of things all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a question of degrees. Some people say, well, aren't all advertisers, aren't all marketers, aren't all politicians, aren't they all con artists? And on some level, they're doing very similar things. I mean, have you or your wife ever bought, a $100 face cream, a $200 face cream that promises...
I haven't, but I don't know. Yeah.
That promises you're going to look 10 years younger within a week. Are you actually going to look 10 years younger? Probably not. Does that cream work better than a $10 cream? Maybe, maybe not. You're going to believe it does, especially if you bought it. So there are things like that, politicians who are selling you on their platform, who are selling you on a vision of the future that everyone knows is never going to happen. But I don't think we can bucket them all as con artists. As I said, I think it's a question of degree and of intention. Is someone nefarious? Is someone really just doing this for their own private purposes and fooling you, actually actively deceiving you and knowing that they're doing it? Or are they someone who really believes what they're saying, who, yes, is a storyteller, but we all are. I mean, we all tell stories every single day. We all con ourselves every single day into believing that, hey, maybe I do look 10 years younger this morning. That cream really is working.
And what's amazing is that not just is there almost anybody who could end up falling for the con, that when you look at victims across all kinds of scams, you find all kinds of people, that the con artists themselves could be from a pretty diverse set of people. You're not going to be able to point to some kid who took some tests at 14 and say, oh, there's your con artist.
Don't you wish you could? That would be so good if you could just identify them.
And then you could have them wear something.
Absolutely,
like
absolutely.
Tag.
A scarlet letter, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we would love, and this is, by the way, why cons work so well, because we would love to label, and we love to put things in buckets. We love to make things black and white. This person is a con artist, this person isn't a con artist, this person will become one, this won't. We're not a victim, this person can be a victim, and that's not the way the world works. But because we want that certainty, that's what con artists exploit. They create certainty for us, and we're so happy that someone is telling us something that makes sense that we buy into it and we don't question it, where we should be saying, oh, things are generally a little bit messier. And what you find is that you're not going to be able to identify a con artist. The good ones never get caught. Or if they get caught 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line. One of the con artists that I wrote about, the great imposter, Ferdinand Waldo Damaro, his real name, not his con name, he operated for decades, and he kept getting caught, and he kept doing it again because they don't look like con artists. If someone looks like a con artist, they're not very good.
Right, that people want to believe. And also, there's an element here where people keep saying, oh, well, I wouldn't fall for it. And I wouldn't fall for, but astonishing numbers of people fall for some kind of con at some point in their lives, large percentages.
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that happens is because we're overconfident. We think it can't possibly be me because I'm a smart person, I'm a skeptical person, I ask questions, I'm not gullible, and I'm intelligent, and I'm a good judge of character. I can tell when someone is out to get me. So we believe all of these wonderful things about ourselves, and that makes us too confident that we can spot the con artist, and so we end up falling for it because we're not on our guard when we should be. And what they do is they sell us what we want to hear. And in the moments when we hear what we want to hear and what we expect to hear, we let down our guard and we become less skeptical when we should be becoming more skeptical. When something's happening you're saying, oh, I finally caught my big break, I finally am getting what's coming to me, that's when alarm bells should ring. Instead, we say, this is great.
So what are some of the most astonishing cons that you came across when you were putting together this book?
So many of them were just extraordinary. Damara, one of his greatest escapades, which I start the book with because it fascinated me so much, was that he pretended to be a surgeon. He, by the way, never finished high school, and he got an appointment by the Canadian Navy during the Korean War as the ship's surgeon. And so he sailed out on a ship with hundreds of men where he was the only doctor, which is insane that he could get people to trust him with so many lives. And lo and behold, he had to perform surgery because it's war, and that's what surgeons generally have to do. And he had a medical textbook with him. He was also very smart, and he talked with a real doctor before he left and said, hey, maybe we should collaborate on a field guide for the troops in case they don't have something and something bad happens and there's no doctor available. And the other doctor said, oh, what a wonderful idea, and basically wrote this guide for him. So he had this guide, he had a medical textbook, and he performed surgeries on some Korean soldiers who'd been injured, and they didn't die. He ended up stitching them together, doing what he did, removing some bullets, and they went off. And as far as we know, they all survived. I say as far as we know because they were Koreans, not Canadians, and so we don't know what happened to them after they left. But he didn't kill anyone, and that's how he got caught, because there was this heroic dispatch that this brilliant doctor committed all of these, performed all of these wonderful surgeries on the high seas. And that's how the real doctor, whose name he'd borrowed, found out about this. And the Canadian Navy, this is the other incredible part of it, did not press charges. Just said, leave quietly, we've been embarrassed enough, just leave. And he left, and he went to the US, and he enlisted in the military again.
Because it goes round and round.
Absolutely.
And again and again. And from the grand kind of multi-year, well-thought-out individual con, you also talk about, in aggregate, the little cons that happen all the time, the ones that happen in your office.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, people lie to each other all the time. Conversations are based, social interactions, conversations, they're all based on white lies.
How are you doing today? I'm fine.
Exactly. You hate the person, right, who answers that honestly, who instead of saying, I'm fine, says, you know what, I didn't sleep that well, and so when I woke up this morning, I didn't know what hit me, and I really didn't want to get out of bed, and then, my head kind of hurts, and I couldn't find my Advil, and on and on and on. That person is a person who you will never again ask, how are you? And you probably will never want to speak to again. And so we do this all the time. Oh, you look lovely. Not, you look kind of tired this morning. And those things happen so effortlessly that we're used to believing things. And most people aren't really deceiving you with a malicious intention, and so we just let it go, and we don't think of it even as deception. But those minor cons, I think we all have that in us.
And in that kind of global sense, there's a lot woven through here about the opiate of the masses, and the idea that a long time ago there was a man who said he talked to God, or he said he was the son of God, and he said, I've got all kinds of fabulous stories to tell. And then so on and so forth, and on and on the line. And today we have huge multi-billion-dollar institutions that surround a lot of these stories.
Absolutely. And I got a very wonderful quote from a psychologist, Seymour Epstein, who says something along the lines of, there's a reason that the Bible is all narrative and told through stories and not a logical argument or anything like that, because that's what we want. And the reason that cons work and that cons are so ubiquitous is the exact same reason why we get religions spontaneously in every single society. You start getting organized religion, and it's something that's impossible to stamp out. I mean, we even have science fiction about this, right? About people who try to stamp out religiosity, and it doesn't work.
Well, we have history about it.
And we have history about it. Right. I mean, the communists did their best to make sure that the Soviet Union was a secular society. Didn't really work.
And which necessarily brings me to, we talk a lot here about bad rabbis, people who are doing various cons, short and long,
yes,
in their religious salesmanship, and sometimes are engaging in criminal activity, abusive activity, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot there about why people want that. That people do at some point seem to kind of want that kind of figure in their life, a charismatic person who takes care of their concerns for them.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons why cons often flourish, unfortunately, in religious settings, because we don't want to question that, because we want someone to tell us why things happen the way they do. We want someone who gives us meaning. We want someone who doesn't just take care of us, but makes our life worth something, and who makes us feel like we are worth something, and that the future will be better than it is today. That things will always kind of work out. And it's a beautiful framework, but within that framework, you get a lot of really nasty characters. And I talk about kind of the thin line between legitimate organized religions and cults, spiritual cults. And it's really scary that when you get to that level of con, which I think is the worst of all, because you're taking something literally sacred and you're just completely twisting it around and ruining people's lives from the soul. It's not just a Ponzi scheme where you lose money, but these are your most fundamental beliefs about the world. And there's a reason why when people are in cults, it's impossible almost to get them out. You give them evidence. You say, look at this leader, and it doesn't have to be a cult. Let's talk about bad rabbis. You can give them evidence that this is a bad rabbi. Look at all of the things that have happened. Here is a financial trail that shows what he's done with your donations. Here is evidence of abuse or whatever has happened, and people will dismiss it. That's how strong.
Because I know him.
Exactly. I know him. He wouldn't do that. And they will look at the evidence and they will just completely dismiss it. And that's why a lot of these leaders, religious leaders, are able to keep doing it for years and years and years. And it's heartbreaking, but there's very little to be done, because what do if you're giving them all the evidence? You're saying, look, this is not a good person, and still.
And there's a reason why I know him works, right?
Yes.
Because that's actually why and how we're judging almost everyone around us, is the degree to which we know them. And there's just a whole range of studies showing how and why that happens.
Absolutely. When we are familiar with someone, familiarity doesn't breed contempt, it breeds liking and comfort. And
I guess outside of holiday family context.
yes, outside of holiday family context, let's put a caveat on that. When you're familiar with someone, you trust them more. There's a concept known as mere exposure, which basically says merely being exposed to something makes you like it more. So if you've heard music before, you're going to like it more the second time around. If you've seen a person before, even if you haven't really talked about them, you'll like them more a second time around. Now think about a religious community where you have, say, a congregation, and you see the same people all the time, and you implicitly think they're good people because they are coming to the same place you're coming. They're like you. They're similar, they're familiar, they're people you can trust. And that con artists love to infiltrate those types of communities and then use them, because that is what makes people like them. That is what makes people trust them. They don't even have to work for it, because there's already kind of this stamp of approval.
Right, and there's also the snowball, where it's not just that you only really have to convince the first member of a community.
Yes.
And then they do much of the heavy lifting for you with the second and the third and the fourth.
Absolutely, and this happens all the time now, not just in real communities, but in virtual communities. Think about Facebook. So con artists love Facebook. It's like their favorite thing in the world, because if you get one person to accept your friend request, and all of a sudden you're connected to that person's friends, and they probably think that you're legitimate because you have friends in common, the snowball effect happens, and finally you hit upon the person you actually wanted to trust you, because either they're in a company that you wanted to infiltrate, or they are somehow good targets who you've narrowed down. And lo and behold, you have the stamp of approval, and it's just Facebook. But it's crazy how people will look at that and they say, oh, we have 20 friends in common. Good guy.
And a lot of people would say that, oh, well, even if someone came to me and they had some references, or they had some online, I could see that they were connected to some other people. I mean, I'm not going to go out and do something crazy for them. I'm not going to go out and risk my own money, risk my own position, risk my own family for this person I barely know. But one of the amazing things is you will, if they just scale you up, if they get you to do a little thing for them and a little bigger thing, that you would think that you would trust people more if they give you stuff. But it turns out they trust you more if they ask for stuff.
Absolutely. It's one of the techniques of persuasion that I talk about. And there's a whole bucket of them. One of them is the foot in the door technique, where all you have to do is get someone to do something small for you, and then all of a sudden they're willing to stake their reputation on you. They're willing to give you advice, money, time, whatever it is you need. Because the way that it works is we like to have a consistent image of ourselves. And so we think, well, if I helped this person out once before, must be a good person who's actually worth helping, and so I'm going to help him again and again and again, and it's such a remarkable cognitive mechanism where con artists can really get you doing things that you never thought you would do, and you don't even really realize that you're just being a helpful person.
One of the things that while there are all these various consequences for what a con artist might do to someone, and we talked earlier about abuse and violations and so on and so forth, there are people out there who are completely lacking in seemingly any moral compass, and who will take this to even further. I mean, you talked about this Damara fellow who chose to be a fake surgeon and probably put who knows how many people's lives at risk. There are people, I just saw a story the other day about people selling Syrian refugees in Turkey fake life vests, right? That they're producing them cheaply,
Yep.
and then putting them out there.
No, it's terrible. And I have another story in the book about people selling fake bomb detectors to soldiers. Talk about, bomb and mine detectors. If they're using fake technology, you're not just putting people's lives at risk, you're putting military operations at risk. You're putting just so much at stake, and you don't care. It's insane to me to think that there are people who are totally fine with that and who are even kind of proud of getting away with it. The same people who sold the fake detectors also said that it could help a family find their missing daughter. So they just needed to give her photograph, and it doesn't just find mines, it finds missing people, apparently. And you're giving people, in that sense, yes, you're not risking their life, but you're giving them such false hope, and you're taking advantage of them at such an awful moment where their daughter has been kidnapped. And I think you do have to, on some level, and this isn't all con artists, by the way, not everyone goes to that extreme, but on some level, you have to not care about anyone but yourself.
Right, you have to be willing to take what's theirs, take what someone else's.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's and damn the consequences. And one of the things this book got me thinking a lot about was the ways in which there are tinier cons that happen to us from all kinds of people who are not con artists, but who are just our bosses, our friends, our family, the ways in which we might get taken advantage of all the time with a lot of the same techniques.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily consciously, but it's just there's someone in our community or someone in our corporation or someone in the various organizations we might be affiliated with who probably got to their relatively esteemed position by doing a lot of similar things to this. Absolutely. And then is going to keep doing it to us.
Absolutely. I think one of the interesting things that I learned was the unofficial Bible of con artists is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a book of business advice on winning friends and influencing people. And I think that we use those techniques all the time. You've probably done research on someone you were going to have a conversation with to see what can we talk about, what do we have in common, what sports teams does this person like, how can I establish a common ground so that this person will like me, so that we'll have a good relationship, especially if you're in a business meeting and you're trying to pitch them something and you're trying to sell them something. But even if it's not business, even if it's a friendship or a social occasion, but you just want to be on their good side, well, that's the exact thing on a smaller scale that con artists do all the time. They find ways to make themselves liked.
And so I guess we kind of all have to be on our guard, not just about the big scam, but all the little things, and say, what is it that's driving this given relationship?
Absolutely.
And am I being taken advantage of? Yeah.
I think there's definitely a lot to that. And when I was done researching this book, I lost faith in humanity. I thought, people are terrible. Everyone's out to get me. This is awful. I just want to lock myself in a box and not deal with anyone. I've come around. I've decided, this happens all the time, but big cons don't happen all the time. And most people aren't out to get you for bad reasons. Yes, everyone wants to be liked, and yes, everyone will deceive you in some ways, but ultimately, isn't it better to be more open and to build relationships and to meet new people and have new experiences rather than be skeptical of everyone you meet and say, oh, what's in this for you? Why do you want to be friends with me? That kind of attitude can get not just tiresome, but also sad, and I think you'd be a little isolated emotionally.
Right, and there is also the flip side to that, and something that I continually find surprising in life, which is that in the same way that people are open to being conned, and that many people are in some way con artists themselves, that people can be extremely generous and kind-hearted when they're asked to be.
Absolutely.
And that whether working on behalf of certain causes, I've asked people to step up. And it turns out people are very willing to try to, if there's someone asked them to do their part, or to my own benefit, I've just asked people, could you help me out with something? So it turns out there's a great amount of a charitable sensibility among most people most of the time, and we could be tapping into that for good.
Absolutely. And I think what we need to understand is that the balance is against con artists. They're a minority. Most people will be charitable rather than not. I think the vast majority of the population are the good guys, which is reassuring, and which makes it possible to try to understand con artists and to try to figure out, well, are there ways that we can minimize their damage? Because if they were the majority of the population, then that would just be a completely futile exercise.
All right, well, let's see what we can do to decrease the damage, increase the love. Maria Konnikova, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And now, maintaining steady and an almost uncomfortable level of eye contact with Ross McCammon. I think if there's one thing that so many of us get wrong every day, every interaction, is that we can't get out of our own way, right? We can't just figure out how to just be with other people. And it's a failure that means a lot, right? And it's a failure that does a lot to us in every workplace, in every environment.
Yeah, especially when you feel in over your head. If it's you're starting a new job or maybe starting your first big job, one thing you obsess over, I think, a lot is the job itself. But the other part of working is working with people, and that is a difficult thing. It's sort of like going to a family reunion. You wouldn't necessarily choose to hang out with these people, but you need to, and you need to have a good time, but you also need to work. And if you're a little freaked out, that the social aspect can kind of go by the wayside. But I think it's a really important thing. I think it's part of a whole hidden landscape of skills that nobody ever really talks about.
And this relationship that we have with people at work, it's this weird third relationship. They're neither friend nor family. They're not people, and they're not people who we just kind of do business with and that's it. We have to have a little bit more there, but not too much.
Yeah, and it's amazing because we spend more time with the guy in the next cubicle over than we do sometimes with our own families, with our children, in a lot of cases, So, and I think that there's
except for those of us who employ children.
No, that's a good point. But I think that in those relationships, while they can be challenging, they can also be they're also really, really important.
You start off with some stories about yourself and how you had a mix of success and failure in establishing some of these relationships early on.
About 10 years ago, when I came to work at Esquire in New York from an in-flight magazine in Dallas, I felt a little intimidated. I felt a lot intimidated. I felt in over my head. And when I got here, I screwed up in lots of ways. I mean, not only did I screw up at my job, and tasks and things like that, but socially, I sort of, made what I thought were some missteps. The first thing I ever did at Esquire was offer to shake the hand of a colleague in the men's room before I even had walked into the office. I would suggest that's not the right approach. Just wait to introduce yourself after that. But in any case, that there are all kinds of ways that I think I screwed up. But I think what I write about in the book is that that's really important. That's a really important thing to do early on in a job, especially one that intimidates you. Because if you're not screwing up, I think you're probably not in the right position. It's probably not the big job that you hoped it would be. You need to be challenged.
So shake a few bathroom hands on your way.
Yeah, exactly. You have a good story for a book someday.
There you go. There's this weird interplay where when you're applying for a job, when you're first coming into a job, you have to project confidence, but you can't be too confident.
Right.
How do you find that balance?
Well, I think the key is curiosity. I think that's a really underrated aspect of your personality and your outlook. When you're interviewing or when you're on the first day of a job, or if you're entering an unfamiliar meeting room in which you have to perform, I think that one of the thing that the sort of sweet spot is curiosity, is just being open and sort of being aware of everything that's going on, and that kind of cuts through your anxiety, and it takes the focus off of you, I think, and onto other people, which I think is really helpful when we're, working our way through an awkward social situation. If it's any of those, like first day or in the men's room.
And I would imagine, in assembling this, and you're also a business etiquette columnist at Entrepreneur Magazine, and so I'm imagining you hear lots of stories from people of their myriad screw-ups.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's certainly universal. It's certainly universal, and I think that, but again, I think it's just something that we don't talk about enough, that we don't acknowledge enough, and we always talk about. I think we think about these work. The screw-ups related to our work, but sometimes it's the social screw-ups, I think, that can haunt us for years later,
Right, and I'm imagining, I could say any number of things poorly to my wife, and then weeks later I could say, remember that thing 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
But if I did that at work, it would be pretty awkward.
I think
to say, 3 weeks ago I said something to you, and I've been thinking about it ever since.
I think that you should not do that. I think you should not revisit things like that. I think that that is something, like as you suggest, for your personal life. I think that gets into a level of personal relationship that is not helpful, maybe not appropriate, and certainly is probably unwanted by the person, unless there's something I think that you truly regret. If there's something that maybe is leaving a lasting scar or something like that. If you truly screwed up and affected someone negatively, I think that you should revisit that and make it right. I mean, one thing that happens, I think, is when we get into conflict at work, and we try to win a fight at work, or win an argument, or win the whatever it may be. That's never going to work, And I think that by knowing that you shouldn't try to win. That you shouldn't try to win, because you might win you're gonna lose respect from the other person, and I think that's never something you want to do.
So why is that though? Why do you lose on the way to winning?
Well, because you can always you can manipulate things, and you can shut things down aggressively. You can intimidate people into doing what they want, depending on who it is. But I think you're always going to regret it. It's always going to you still have to work with these people. You still have to sit next to them. You still have to, but I think it gets into that balance that we were talking about earlier. Right,
and you talked before about the kind of the intimacy of workplace relationships, in the sense of just pure hours spent, and that there's just a lot of that face time. But then work also involves a lot of these episodic interactions, or even isolated interactions, where there are the people who you'll see once a quarter. There are the people you'll see once in your life, and you have to do okay with those too. How do you manage them? Well, I think a lot of that is how you approach a situation. Of how you I think what is a common thread in the book, and it's not, I think it's fairly obvious, but I think it's worth reminding people, is that eye contact is really important. Some level of commitment is really important. There's a whole chapter in the book on handshakes, because while that seems like just something, a quick, interaction, there's a lot of meaning in the handshake. There's a lot of, there have been studies that show if you shake a hand sort of with moderate vigor, as they say, as the researchers say, that the people who do that, who don't go weak and don't go, like this sort of hand crusher move, that correlates to a successful interview, and that so these small things are sort of emblematic of our level of commitment. And you can be too committed. That's one thing. You can be too passionate, So yeah. Right, and there's an idea there. There's the economic concept of signaling, which I think explains so much of what we do, where if you're in a job interview, you're only going to be in that job interview for, maybe you add up a few interviews. Maybe you've spent a couple hours talking to people at a company. Maybe they've read a single-page resume. Maybe they've read a few samplings of your work. But they're hiring you for theoretically 5 to 10 years. They're not making that commitment up front, but there's a lot there where they have to be able to take a lot from a series of very small things. And we have to figure out how to communicate well in those small things. It's tough. Yeah, and I think what you have to do, as you can imagine, is find
sort of a balance between, it's like the handshake. It's like eye contact. I mean, you can make eye contact to the point that it's kind of creepy. You can shake a hand. You can. Well, that's just the way it is with this situation. But you can shake a hand to the point where you injure someone. You can go overboard, but you can also go sort of weak. You think about sometimes at the end of an interview, somebody will ask, so do you have any questions for me? The answer is yes, but it should be maybe one question. I think that discretion and restraint in that situation is really valuable. It's sort of a tactic. I mean, the other thing that's valuable is to, this sounds almost banal, but be yourself. I think that there's a lot of deception that happens in job interviews, and that can, if you deceive, and you might not even sort of be knowingly deceiving about your qualifications or even your level of enthusiasm, which is a really important thing to get across, how much you want the job, but those kinds of things, if they're found out later, I think it can really be tough. I mean, the people I think that I've seen sort of not work out are either I've hired or I've seen hired are people who they were one person in their interview and they were another person on not the first day, because the first day nobody is the first day is really weird, but the second day, third day, or third week, fourth week, a different person. So
let's quickly talk. I don't touch a lot of interviewees, but let's figure out the handshake. What is the right way to do this?
The key, if I may, I'm going to leave you hanging just for a moment.
Oh my goodness.
It's all about this right here.
Yeah.
It's all about this sort of piece of flesh.
Right.
We need to.
The muscle.
We're going to have to. That's going to have to. Yeah. We're going to
connect them.
Yeah. That.
And it's a satisfying.
And that's moderate vigor. You say I'm not going too fast, I'm not going too slow. I'm not crushing your hand, but you feel it.
Yeah.
Right.
We're going up and down with the beat of the conversation.
At this point, it's awkward.
Yeah.
At this point, this is too long. But for the sake of demonstration, this is really where you want to be.
Yeah. For our viewers at home.
Yeah. And the eye contact is getting weird too. So let's. We can stop. Okay. All right.
That's a good lesson. But you also have a decent sized chapter on how to talk to important people. And I think this is one of those funny things where it comes up with some frequency, where there's someone who maybe you'll only talk to them once. Yeah. Or maybe you feel like you shouldn't even be allowed to talk to them, but here you are, and you're in the same room. How do you make do?
Well, I think the first thing, one of the rules that I establish early on is that everyone is really weird and everyone is really nervous. I think that, and then that might not be the case, but I think it's okay to think that. And I think that that's about relating, and that people are always, even if they are intimidating you, they might be intimidating, even if they're important people. I've seen, in the, people coming through the offices of Esquire that, famous people that seem, they just seem a little thrown off or a little nervous or a little odd, in a way that I wouldn't have expected. But they're just people, and they're people doing their jobs. And I think that's the other thing to think about is what does someone do every day? I mean, everybody's working, and that's the way we relate to people. Whenever I have interviewed, famous people for my job. I mean, the thing that seems to work best is when I ask them about their job and about specifically the way that they work, and what their job entails and the specifics of that. And I think that people are always ready to talk about that because it in so many ways our jobs, we make them look effortless. I mean, if I went home and just talked about exactly what I did all day, I mean, that's a really specific sequence of events. And I think people want to talk about that because it's how they've been obsessing over it every day. But I found that works. That's the trick.
It's an interesting thing there that work seems to occupy this space where it's kind of on the one hand profane and on the other hand sacred, in the sense that we feel like it's not who we really are. We really are who we are at home, or we really are who we are with those we love. But then we make it inviolable in certain ways. We make it as something that really matters. And there's this tension there between the idea that it doesn't matter and yet it does. It's not such a big deal and yet it is. And finding that sweet spot in terms of ourselves and how we deal with others is really difficult.
I think that is the inescapable reality of work. It's that we need to do it. We don't always want to do it. Hopefully we do. But I think for most Americans, most people who are workers, this isn't how they would choose to spend their time. So that is just one, sort of irony of the situation, or one, that there's a lot of tension in that moment. There's a lot of stress there. But I think that to sort of be self-aware and to recognize where that balance is for you, but also to recognize that that's happening with other people, that they don't necessarily want to be there either, that they're talking to you in a way that might be a little aggressive or whatever, but that's not, they're dealing with their own stresses as well. I think everybody's dealing with that tension at work. Now I think there's a lot of humor in all of that. I don't think that it's all intense and or maybe it is intense and that's where the humor comes from. But I think I think that there's something sort of amusing about a lot of that stuff. But you're right, it is the tension, and I think that the key with dealing with it is self-awareness, and then also empathy. That everyone's dealing with that tension.
Right, and there's a sense of respect there too, in the sense that one can imagine any number of scenarios that you've been in where perhaps not with your work itself, but with other people who are working in customer service of some realm, the DMV or Verizon or what have you. And at some point, I think we've all heard someone on the other end of the line who's really screwing things up just say to you, or they're dealing with something that's really screwed up and just say to you, look, I'm just trying to do my job here.
Isn't that the key to everything? I think that, even if it's people at, your own office, or if you're on the phone with somebody else who doesn't seem to be responding to the reality that you see, there's so many other things going on that we don't see, and I think there's so many other things that are going on with someone who we are actually looking at across a conference room table that has nothing to do with what the matter at hand, and I think that's just it's a really important aspect to working with people.
And there's a transformation that goes on where you are writing, when you begin this book, about things that happened 10 years ago when you first came to New York and you felt like, I guess, the country yokel. It sounds like you...
Rude.
Yeah. That you,
as my bosses put it.
Yeah. And that as you reflect on these things and you get some distance, like, it's okay and they're all jokes and everybody does them. But why are they so why do they create so much agita in the moment?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think everybody wants to be on the inside. Everybody wants to be on the inside, either a part of an industry, or maybe at a certain for me it was Esquire, but for other people it's all kinds of things, right? But you want to be on the inside, and I think you think. Well, the inside is full of a bunch of insiders, and that's what I thought, and that's what sort of intimidated me is coming up to New York, that New York was just full of, people who are on the inside. It is the inside, But I think what I realized, as I worked here, is that the reason why the inside is so great is because there are a bunch of people who wanted to be there and who came from somewhere else, and are outsiders, and that the inside is full of outsiders, and it wouldn't keep being great if those people weren't infusing it with new ideas and new energy, and that is what I brought to it. That's what I represented, I think, for the man who hired me. that's what it was a benefit that I wasn't a part of this thing that was already happening, I was going to add something to it. And I think that when we come at an intimidating situation like that, with that point of view, I think it's a lot easier, and I think it eliminates a lot of stress. And to understand that your value is in something that you might not realize. It's not that you know exactly how to do your job. That's, I think, for most workplaces, that's not necessarily the your true value. Your value is that you can see how the thing has been done, and then you can do it better or in a different way, and that's what outsiders do.
Right. And there's the flip side of that, which is that not everybody wants your version of the inside, right?
No,
and that not everybody wants to be a VP at Goldman Sachs. Not everybody wants to be president of the United States. Not everybody wants to be senior editor at Esquire. Not a lot of people want to be in my chair. When you do get there, and when you do get to that place where you want to be, and you find those other people who want to be in the same place, that can be the camaraderie, and that can be the differentiating factor, is not so much something that that you need to learn or something that you can adapt to, but that you always wanted to be there with them anyway.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You're right. This what we think of as the right way of doing things, or as I was saying, the inside, that doesn't actually exist, right? Like that's all that we've created that, and I think you're right in suggesting that everybody has their own version of that. But they don't match up. Nobody's agreeing on even what that is,
There's never the inside, because there's always a further inside. If you really want to push it, you'll always find that that at a certain level, it's not this level of editor and this level of getting to parties. It's that level of editor and that level of getting to parties. And even for a president of the United States, Barack Obama right now is figuring out where he stands in the pantheon of presidents. And are you in this club who achieved XYZ number of treaties and so on and this and that and the other thing? And you can spend your whole day trying to figure out who's above you. Yeah. But if you spend a little more time figuring out where you are,
that's
and who's around you.
And the other thing is, you can go so far. Maybe you do figure it out. Maybe you do figure out how to keep going farther and farther inside and the inner circle, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is the stuff of Shakespeare. You can lose perspective. You can become so inside that you don't even see where you are, and that can happen as well. So, I think with this book, the main theme and that the thing that sort of culminates in is that you don't want to get too far inside. Even if you can figure out where that is, you don't want to get there. You always want to have some part of you that is still outside of things, looking in. And that there's so much value in that, and there's so much quality in that, and there's so many new ideas, and that's what's making you do that's what doing a good job is.
Right, and if you stay who you are, you'll work well with others.
I hope so, yeah.
Ross McCammon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's all for this week's episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can also listen to an audio-only version of this program as a free podcast available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish Channel is available on cable, Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPTM Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.